Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mentor Spotlight. Today, we've got Jarrett Rumoro on the podcast. We had a fascinating discussion with him about the interesting world of intellectual property. It's a super important topic that I think people need to know a lot more about, and so I hope that you'll stick around and listen through the whole episode. There's a lot of really good wisdom just kind of sprinkled throughout it. Jarrett's a super smart guy. Let's roll.
Hey Jarrett, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing really well. Glad to be here. Super gas. Thanks for inviting me in.
Yeah, really
we
nice to have
appreciate you coming in.
Yeah.
Yeah, great to have you here in the
It's a beautiful studio you have here.
Yeah. So, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, kind of your professional interests, what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Jarrett Rumoro. I work here in Huntsville for the Boeing Company. I do intellectual property strategy and protection. So intellectual property, IP, is my wheelhouse.
Awesome.
My passions are, the intersection of business and law, which is why I fell in love with intellectual property.
Yeah.
I used to be an entrepreneur myself for a while, kind of right while I was a student in school and for the first 4 years after school. And then I fell back on obviously that didn't work out, or else I wouldn't be working at the Boeing Company, but learned a whole lot, enjoyed it a great deal, and I've ever been connected to the entrepreneurial world for that reason. So appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I know that, there's such a wide range of experience among the mentors that we have here at the I2C. It's always exciting to hear kind of about their own experiences with entrepreneurship. If you're down to tell us a little bit about, what you did with that, I'd be interested in hearing it.
Yeah, no problem. Absolutely. So, I kind of stumbled upon entrepreneurship. It wasn't something that I grew up thinking like I want to be a business person and all that. My dad was a musician.
Awesome.
My grandfather was a musician in downtown Chicago, and they did jazz. So my dad was a live performer, improv, jazz guitarist, and that's how I grew up, falling in love with music and the arts in that way. And then when I went to college at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, I actually studied ancient history. So I was a history major. I studied classical civilizations of all of the historical genres. That was my favorite because I'm Italian-American. So always very curious about ancient Rome and Greece. So that was kind of my passion. I followed it. It was great. I learned a whole great deal of information.
I'm sure.
Super relevant, portraying what happened in the past and how it forecasts onto the future. It's just a repetition of itself. But after that, I decided I wanted to go back to school, and I didn't know whether or not I wanted to do my Juris Doctor or get my MBA. And a lot of people, have their different druthers on one or the other. But my dad was like, look, you could always be a business person with your law degree, but if you ever want to practice law or be an asset in the room with legal expertise, you can go to law school. So I chose downtown Chicago. I went to John Marshall Law School. And at that time, I was like, well, maybe I'll do like entertainment law and, maybe do like music on entertainment, represent, acts or, musicians or performers or work in that facet. So I started taking classes on intellectual property.
That's awesome.
And as I was doing that, I met a lot of people that were entrepreneurial spirited, great business friend of mine, Nicholas Coriano. Shout out to Nick. He was a serial entrepreneur. Nicholas was always involved in business, always wanted to be involved in business, and had many different, invested in real estate, invested in a lot of different things. And so we always talked about and joked about business, and we always thought about, starting a business together. And we were sitting in the library one day, and everybody that was in the library was walking around with bottled water, right? Everybody carries it with them like every day, all the time. And on the bottle, there's a label which has material there, and it's like, kind of a great billboard in a way to kind of broadcast something, right? You talk about like all the wasted space that we have on products that people can market and brand to. So we were like, well, why don't we start a beverage company and speak to the student experience and teach, and bring education to the forefront. So we started a brand called Hydrocation, and we sold bottled water with educational content on the label.
Cool.
And then we kind of niche marketed to schools, universities, and then we kind of moved into like the convenience stores, and then like big events like, races or marathons where there's going to be a lot of people who are health oriented. So it was a health and educational embodiment. It was an American product built here in the United States, and we got lucky to partner with a lot of great companies that helped us launch our business. And I raised funding from my close family and friends, kind of just, hey, we're starting a business and we're looking to sell some shares of equity in our company. And if you would be so interested, we're selling them at this price. And so we got some initial family and friend investment, and we launched right into business, not having sold any beverage anything in my life. But at the same time, kind of thinking through all the facets like all entrepreneurs do, how do I get organized as a business, as an LLC or whatever it might be, and then what brands do we want to operate under, and how do we do that legally and make sure that we're protecting ourselves as individuals at the same time that we run for our business. So I was in the beverage industry, and it was a great experience. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot, because I'm sure you have some.
No, that's really cool. I think that's an interesting point that you make about, like, looking at, I like the way that you saw that opportunity in the market. The thing that immediately popped into my head is how you can kind of look at that same gap there of people walking around with bottles and there's so much wasted space on it. And it made me think of how Coke has taken the shape of their bottle and they've turned that into,
a trademark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something that they use in their marketing. A lot of
y'all
Coke's...
speaking marketing is speaking my language. Y'all talking about bottle shapes and advertising. I totally agree. They talk about how certain products on shelves will fit so they can get more products together. That way they can create an advertisement. And most people, they talked about how a lot of produce, when they're in the same section, like boxes of orange juice, they'll put them together because they're so tight, and it makes one big picture.
Oh, yeah.
It's like they're using different ways to create advertising on products, which is really cool.
Yeah, we were all about that. I mean, we were trying to use at the time, we were using scan tags, a lot of scan tag technology. That way we would partner with content providers and be like, hey, look, you could buy a bottle of water, regular bottled water that's just going to be just generic water, or you can get an educational experience for free out of it and learn about stuff you're interested in. So it kind of, and how students, most of the time they're in transit on the way to and from school. I lived in Chicago. I was on the train a lot, sitting there with my bottle, and I would read stuff that was just around me, whether it was on my bottle or on my phone.
I'm constantly looking at signs.
Yeah, so I mean, if I read something I was like curious in it, I would do more diligence while I was sitting there. I had nothing to do, kind of read more about it, learn more about it. And I think, there's a lot of wasted space out there in marketing, and there's just a lot of places where people don't think to be creative with their marketing, like you were talking about, maybe the bottle shapes and things like, and these can all be value for your business. So you think about how to do that and structure that. So
and so I guess now that we've kind of like established like really where you're coming into this from, you're really passionate about IP. So I was wanting to ask kind of what is IP like, if you can give us, a really, really brief like crash course in what IP is.
Yeah, it's a very, when you hear intellectual property, you think it's some scary topic that you're going to have to deep dive forever in, but really it's just any creation of the mind that you can own a legal right to. Yeah. So it's going to be, that's why they call it intellectual property, because it's intangible, it's embedded in things. It's not necessarily, I mean, it could be something you build, but it's mostly embedded in the technology that you're building. So, but there's four main areas of intellectual property law. So then you get into like, how do you legally protect your intellectual assets? And that's copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets, and patents. And so each one of those areas covers a different kind of protection for the information that you create. And each one of those categories has benefits to them, and things that are governed underneath the body of law that follow. And then there's national laws that govern it, like, statutes and laws that are, federally regulated, those areas. And then there's state laws also to protect you. Yeah. And then there's the common law. So in the law, there's also what, kind of transfers down from merry old England. They called it the common law. Yeah. And it's basically case after case, based on precedent, they set the law. That's how people follow the guidance of the court system. So there's a common law tradition of protecting IP, and then there's the states, governs laws that govern it, and then there's national laws that govern intellectual property, and then international laws that govern, products that moves across, country to country. So then you'll have organizations that follow, like the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, will be thinking more globally about IP rights as they pertain, because they're also geographic rights. So, when you're in the United States, you're protected here, but it doesn't protect you abroad necessarily. So you have to figure out, if you're going to be doing business internationally, how you're going to protect your IP in that global forum.
Yeah. Is there a specific level of it that you kind of specialize in more than the others?
Yeah, I would say, well, I fell in love with trade secrets.
Yeah.
Trade secrets to me are the most fascinating part of business because they're the most vulnerable part of your business because it's supposed to be kept secret. So if you're not protecting your information that could be protected as trade secret, you're putting yourself at great risk. So whenever I get into a consultation with somebody, the first thing I try to figure out pretty quickly is what could amass their trade secret portfolio and make sure that they have that button down right away. Because that, to me, is a big risk. If you're just out blabbing about your fate, because you're passionate as an entrepreneur, you want to talk about things. People ask you a lot of questions, and especially your customers and your competitors who are hiding amongst the customers. And you can very easily give away those information assets and therefore destroy the value of the trade secret. So that area to me was always fascinating. And I had a really cool law professor that was like way, gung-ho about it and used to do litigation and trade secret law. So I really got into that. And then as I moved into the Boeing company, made that transition into selling in the aerospace and defense market, all of the information assets that float around a business the size of that every day, most of that information is potentially protectable as trade secrets. So you got to think through that. And we can go into, if you'd like, a discussion about each of the 4 areas of intellectual property law and what they seek to protect. And then as an entrepreneur or business person, what you can do, what measures you can take to align your business behaviors with those protection mechanisms.
I want to know more about the business. I have my own photography business, so I would love to know more about the business side.
So, every business has, copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets, and patents could pertain to any business. We'll start with copyright because I think when you're talking about photography or we're sitting in here recording this live, a copyright is protecting any original work of authorship fixed in a tangible medium. So the moment you're done writing on the piece of paper or you snap the camera, or you record this, what we're doing right now, as soon as it's in a tangible medium and it could be, copied or reproduced, you have created a copyright protectable item. And then at that point you have something, as long as it's original, you're not like taking a picture of somebody else's picture, right? You're taking, or it has to be original, right? You have to add some modicum of creativity in that work of authorship. So if you're a photographer, the picture you're taking is you're selecting a lot of things. You're making a lot of decisions about the speed
Angle
frame.
view,
Is it black and white, aperture? You're doing a lot of that, and so all of that's protectable by copyright. And the beauty about copyright is you don't have to file anything. You don't have to do anything. You just, as soon as that is original work of authorship fixed in a tangible medium of expression, there's copyright protection that attaches, and so you can register federally for copyright protection. Let's say you have a specific photograph, like, Andy Warhol, you think, or like some specific, work of authorship, that's a sound recording or a song, right? Or a visual audio production, movies and things of that nature. Those things can be registered with the federal United States Copyright Office. And then you get broader protection rights. You have certain rights that then are breathed into your copyright, like, for example, the right to sue somebody in court. So you want to have that right. So you don't have to protect everything that you develop, because every day you're writing things down, right? You're taking multiple pictures. But if you find something that you're like, man, I really think this is the thing, or this is the one, it's very inexpensive. You can spend $35. You could do it yourself online. It's very simple. And you have to deposit a copy of the specimen of whatever it is, and then they'll send you a cool, plaque letter that you can plaque on the wall. And those things are very valuable, because if you ever got in a situation where you wanted to enforce your rights, that documentation, that federal registration would provide you with a prima facie case that you own that. Otherwise, you'd have to prove up ownership, which is sometimes expensive and difficult to do. So those are the copyrights that pertain to photography.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And then say, you're also an entrepreneur and you're like, well, you know what? We need to choose a brand name for our company. We're talking about Spark Studio. We're at the I2C, right? These are all brands that protect our company. So these are trademarks, and trademarks are really cool because they are also, the breadth of what could be a potential trademark is very wide. So it could be any symbol, device, word, pretty much anything that you use to distinguish your company in commerce that's distinctive. So there's a level and spectrum of what makes something distinctive or not. But those things that you use in commerce, that when you start selling your products and service or offering them for sale, that in the mind of the consumer go like, yeah, that's where that source of that product's coming from. Even if they don't know where it is, they're not sure if it's made in, Illinois or Alabama or whatever. They're like, they know it's that company. You probably have a protectable trademark, and you want to start thinking pretty early on about before you launch your business, because a lot of the things that you create in becoming an owner,
it creates brand awareness.
Yeah, and also like you're if you get into a situation where you chose the wrong brand name, you get built up all this legacy, documentation, and you've been putting a lot of equity in terms of building that brand, and then suddenly you get a nasty letter in the mail or a cease and desist letter from somebody who's like, hey, that's actually our federally registered mark. You have a lot of legwork to do to kind of bring yourself up. So traditionally speaking, way in advance, when you're kind of still at the fundraising stages and you want to start a business, you should start thinking about, hey, I'd like to get, a brand name, and start thinking, do your own performance of a knockout search. Like if you go on Google and you can find that same name from another company somewhere on the planet, and they're selling the same product or service as
another
you.
Name.
Yeah, this might be a good time for you to start looking for another name. No, but in all seriousness, trademarks will, if at all, be protected. It's upon use. So somebody can't just take a word, or let's say their name is Spark Studio, and say, oh, that's my trademark. No, they have to actually start using that mark in commerce. They have to do something. You have to use that mark in order to get the attribution for your company. And you don't need to federally register for trademark protection, although federal registration provides you with nationwide protection upon registration. But let's say me and you just do business here in Alabama with Spark Studio. We have protection where you all offer your services here. So if you do Spark Studio in all the state of Alabama and you offer services for that particular region of the country, you could have regular common law, back to the common law protection in that region. But let's say you were like, we want to go national with this, then you want to seek federal registration, which means that if you register, even though you live in Alabama, you've never done business in Georgia, you never done business in California, but if you get a federal registration with the little R symbol, now all of a sudden, if somebody in, Palo Alto decides they're going to start Spark Studio, you can send them a nasty letter and say, actually, we're federally registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and you need to take a license from us. Otherwise, we ask that you kindly cease and desist that activity. You know what I mean? That's where you need to get in touch with counsel and, kind of start that effort. But, what I'm trying to say in long and short of it all is you want to think in advance. Come up with and you want to be on the idea of spectrum of distinctiveness. There's generic brands, like ones that are just like if you wanted to start a milk company and you were like, our brand's milk. Well, no, obviously you can't use milk because that's descriptive of the generic term for whatever the product or service is. But on the other side of the spectrum, you might choose something that's completely fanciful, like Exxon, or like something. Google is a good example, or things that are way out of the ballpark of they're just made up terms. You know what I mean?
I know. I learned this in my marketing class the other day. They said made up words help avoid the negative connotation, so it helps with repercussions. That way, no one thinks of a negative thing because it's a made up word. Right,
and the strength of your trademark is in relationship to the distinctiveness of it. Again, so if your trademark is think Amazon. Amazon's a good trademark because it's what we call arbitrary. Amazon is a word, but as it applies to selling products and services in an online internet marketplace, it doesn't really lead you to think, oh, Amazon, that must be what that is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the other interesting nuance about trademarks is two companies can have trademark rights in the same exact trademark. So when you think of like Ritz-Carlton Hotel and Ritz Crackers, both of them own Ritz as a trademark, but one's applied to the hotel industry, right, and the other one's applied to a cracker.
But it's an easy distinction to know which one's different.
And the test for trademark infringement is a likelihood of confusion. So people are not likely to be confused when they buy a box of Ritz crackers that they're suddenly buying products and services from the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. But you can see that if you've ever seen that, when you're in the marketplace and you're like, man, I don't know how those two companies coexist because they sell such similar products. They sometimes sign coexistence agreements. They're like, all right, you got this marketplace, we got this marketplace, and we agree not to sue one another, and we can be living in the same space together. So you might have seen that or see that and never think to yourself, like, well, how does that even happen, those two companies? So those two right away you can do as an entrepreneur. They're relatively inexpensive. You can even file for your own trademark before you start selling stuff. Like let's say me and you and Gracie are like, we're going to start a business today. We come up with a cool brand name, but we're not going to launch for like another year and a half because we got to raise funding. We got to do a bunch of stuff, right? you can file with the United States Patent and Trademark Office what's called an intent to use application, which basically puts your foot in the door and kind of pre-registers your rights so that when you start selling, your rights will date back to when your application went in.
Yeah.
And that's relatively inexpensive. That's something you could probably do on your own if you have enough, Red Bull or coffee or whatever you're drinking. Speaking of it, so you can probably do that on your own. Those two things right away are going to help you, kind of very inexpensively protect your business from jump.
Yeah. So, kind of switching gears a little bit, who in these situations actually owns the IP?
So upon creation, it's usually like he or she who invents or creates it owns it. So if me and you write something down on a piece of paper, whoever wrote that down owns it. But then there's, you can contractually give that away, that right. So there's that aspect of it where it's like if you hire me to do some work and you want to own that work product, like you hire me to sing on an album or you hire me to build you something or draw you something. If you want to own the intellectual property rights that are inherent in that work, you better contract with me up front to take ownership of that IP, because while you may have a copy of my CD, it doesn't mean you own the rights to my lyrics and my song recording. You know what I'm saying? So you have to know that there's a bundle of rights that are associated, that are breathed into anything that's created that has IP. And if you are a business owner and you're hiring people in your business to do work for you, usually you want to have them sign IP agreements to assign that intellectual property right back over to the business so that your business now is the owner of that IP. So big companies will have you sign, an IP agreement up front as a condition of employment, usually to say, hey, look, anything you create that's defined as IP, and then they define the terms of IP, in the performance of your work here is going to be automatically owned by the company. So that way, there's no issue ever of ownership, because ownership is a great way to defeat a lawsuit. If somebody sues you for IP rights and you're like, actually, that's mine, you're the owner of it. So then they don't think through that aspect. But that's a good question.
Yeah. So kind of in many ways, I know IP can be kind of a commodity, and companies have to be really mindful of how they're protecting it. But how costly can it be when companies mismanage their IP? Are there like some important cases of IP theft that you can point out today?
So yeah, I mean, on the spectrum of what could go wrong if you mismanage IP, I mean, you could go out of business if you don't have your ducks in order. Like, for example, in the trade secret realm, if you have a secret recipe that makes your beverage outstanding or your restaurant, outstanding, like there's a certain recipe you all cook.
A combination of herbs and spices.
Right, and there's some perfect recipe or combination there. There's some secret that that is causing your business to be a discriminator across the industry. If you don't protect that information from disclosure and you just start telling people about it, or you have people that you hire that come in that you share that with and they're not under a duty of confidentiality or something, they move on to another company to start, you could sink your business pretty quickly. Same thing for if you accidentally happen upon choosing a trademark that somebody already owns and they send you a nasty letter, because defending a trademark or defending any of that IP asset, very expensive business. So you don't want to get yourself mired into IP issues. In the context of a very big business, it can be, something as simple as like marking your information upon creation as trade secret or confidential or proprietary, so that you place others on notice that if they ever come into contact with that information, suddenly they're like, oh, that must be a secret, right? Because it's marked as confidential. So there's actions that you have to take in order to keep the information secret. One of them being marking the documents or marking, things so that people who may come into contact are like, oh, suddenly I'm on notice and a duty to protect this. Case law, you could just Google recent case law around intellectual property infringement. They're hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. And there's studies done across the world about the GDP that's lost from intellectual property theft. And it's a big topic across, is China stealing United States intellectual property? Yeah. And so there's a lot of that conversation going on. And we're talking about trillions of dollars of GDP. If somebody steals the trade secrets of the Boeing company or a big company like that, and not only is it a detriment to the company, but now it could be potentially detrimental to the country, because we're building sensitive products and services that serve our warfighter in battle.
Yeah.
So we're talking about not just financial damages and potentially business loss, but potentially loss of life, or trade secret information could be also, very vulnerable in that sense. So it's a big deal. It's on everybody's topic. I mean, cybersecurity is the topic of the day, making sure your information is in a cyber secure way, and so that you're managing your information from not being pirated or stolen. And we just recently saw a lot of cases where like the pipeline got shut down. Remember where the people hacked in and stopped the pipeline?
Yeah.
I mean, when you get hacked and your information is vulnerable, I mean, your customer, everything shuts down because I mean, if they can get into your customer data, or there's sometimes you get these letters in the mail and it's like there's been a class action lawsuit and you're getting a letter because like somebody sued that your information was a part of a massive leak or a spill or something, a data spill. I mean, it goes on a daily basis. So, you be wise as an entrepreneur to start thinking about your intellectual property. As soon as you start thinking about starting a business, you need to start having a plan in place to be ready. And I usually tell people who are young entrepreneurs to have, while you're creating your business plan, just keep a section for IP, a chapter, and then go talk to somebody like myself or somebody who's done business before about, hey, what needs to go in this subchapter here on IP? Because I'm completely unaware of what to do.
Yeah. Is it difficult to protect IP, or is it really more of just like if you do a few simple things on the front end, then in a lot of ways you just don't have to worry about it?
I think it depends on the nature of your business. I mean, there's certain things you can do, like from the trade secret perspective, that are very inexpensive. Don't tell anybody. The best way to keep a secret is not to tell anybody. If it's a recipe, write it down and keep it under lock and key somewhere that nobody knows about, or in a bank safe or vault. The Coca-Cola recipe, you think about that, only 2 people on the planet know it. Only people have different parts of the recipe, and they're under lock and key in a vault in Georgia in a bank. You know what I mean?
Really?
So you could take that kind of measures to protect it. But if you're a small business entrepreneur, maybe lock and key inside of your business office, under, that kind of scrutiny. And that's very low cost, and everybody should be doing that. So that's those kinds of steps you can take. If you're a photographer, you're pretty good. Like you're creating works of authorship at the moment you take the picture. So you're protected by copyright there. If you get into the business of licensing or selling your photographs, or creating montages and doing weddings, stuff like that, you may want to start thinking about getting an agreement in place between you and your customers so that there's an understanding that if I hire you to create pictures for me, who owns the IP that you're creating? Not a copy of the picture, but actually the IP, the intellectual property, because that's a major concern. So, as you grow your business, depends what kind of business you're in. If you're cooking, if you're in the business of making, recipes, or you're a chef, or you're going to start a restaurant, having your recipe book protected and making sure people that come onto your business that have to sign a duty of confidentiality with you, and, not to use or disclose your recipes anywhere ever, those kinds of agreements in place. And then, when it comes to patents, which we haven't even talked about, which most people think is intellectual property, they'll just say, yeah, I got my patent on that, but they don't really even know the difference between a patent and a trademark. But patents can be very expensive because, it takes you to hire an attorney, you got to file the patent application, those fees involved. There's going to be a lot of expenses in getting a patent, but there's great benefit to having a patent as well. So, patenting surrounds the idea of a patent is you're protecting an invention, something that's a thing that's something that's manufactured, or it's a method, process, or system, for example, or those kinds of inventions. Like we're sitting on a chair, we're talking into a microphone. All these are inventions that somebody created, and if you get a patent on that, you can exclude others from making, using, and selling that technology for a period of 20 years. So you have a monopoly kind of exclusionary right to say, hey, no, you can't make, sell, or use that or offer that for sale. You have to take a license from me to do that, which is a very powerful right. But it has a term limit on it. So you have to conceive like Coca-Cola did, like, hey, if we patent our formula for Coca-Cola in 20 years, that's going to now benefit the rest of the world. Now, we're after 20 years, it's in the public domain now. That's the bargain for exchange. So you have to be thoughtful about when you execute on, patenting things, and that can be very expensive. And then, like I said, if you get on the wrong side of being in an infringement, or somebody's poking you around about it having infringed or allegedly infringed, it could be very expensive. And to hire a patent county or IP attorney to come in and do an assessment. Now suddenly there's, paperwork. Maybe they filed some action against you, and it could be very expensive to defend yourself in an IP situation. So not to mention how much stress it puts on you as a business owner to be like going through life thinking like you're about to be sued for intellectual property infringement, and so that'll really stop you before you get started maybe more than the money will. But yeah, it's certainly something you want to avoid at all. At the cost of patenting, or you thinking through those costs in an efficient way, because I know how it is as an entrepreneur. You're strapped on cash. You're trying to chase your anchor customer. You're trying to get a deal so that income's generated. But at the same time, you're thinking, when is it right for me to start protecting my IP? I would say earlier is better than later, and to have a plan about when you want to go file for patent, when you want to start registering your trademarks. And there's things you can do along the way, like filing for the copyright is relatively inexpensive. Filing for the trademark for $400 or $500, maybe you have it. Maybe all you need is an intent to use application. You put the $400 or $500 down and you forget about it and move forward.
So once you apply to these, do you have them indefinitely, or do you have to renew them?
So trademarks and patents are the kinds of things where you have to pay a maintenance fee in order to say that you're still, like in the trademark sense, like if you can get registration. Let's say you have a perfect trademark, goes through the office, and you get registration. There's certain points in time where you'll have a fee to keep it alive. Otherwise, you'll have abandoned the trademark. So you have to keep
and somebody else can come in and get the trademark?
That's right. So if me and you file for a trademark, we get registration, and then like in the I think there's a 2 or 4 year window period where you have to start making your mate, and you have to keep it alive. So they'll send you a letter, usually to your counsel or whoever filed it, and say, hey, look, did you intend to keep this alive? Like there's a fee that you need to pay. If you don't pay that fee and you just keep floating around in business and you're not using your mark in commerce, then somebody else can come in and take that because it's abandoned now. So you might have seen that or heard that, like an abandonment of your rights. So it's kind of like real estate law. I don't know if you're familiar with real estate law, but if you own a property, let's say me and you bought a property in Tennessee, it's a parcel of land, and we owned it outright. We have the deed and everything, but over the course of the last 5 years, we haven't been up there, and somebody actually moved there, built a house on it, and started living on that property. They may have adversely possessed you of that legal right to the land because they went in there hostily, openly. We should have known as a reasonable, diligent landowner that we should have been enforcing our rights. So it's kind of the same thing. We want to try and create a situation where IP owners are taking a proactive measure to keep a maintenance fee. Same thing with patents. You can own a patent and then stop paying maintenance fees and allow it to go away, to abandon your patent. So certainly those can be expensive. That's why it's an expensive game to get into IP, but there's things you can do up front. $400, $25, $30 here. Those agreements
saves
that
you
you
in
have.
the long run.
Yeah, oh my goodness, I'm telling you, right? And it saves you the comfort to going to bed at night going like, okay, I paid Gracie to do the work. And she agreed with me that upon the creation of that work, about that photograph, that I would own the IP and I would pay her compensation for that. And so they start to build a relationship for your employees and also your customers who might be buying things from you as well.
Yeah. And as I understand it, it really is like the ways that you can protect it are kind of a spectrum from patenting it to a trade secret. It's very much like they have one's strong where the other is weak. Is that accurate?
I would say it's just a different way to protect. Certain facets of intellectual property law cover the scope of what they think about it as a Venn diagram. A patent and a trade secret and a copyright and a trademark, some of those intersect in different places. So a patent, you can patent something that you could potentially keep as a trade secret. Then you have to make a strategic choice. Again, back to what I do for the company that I work for. A lot of it is making the strategic choice about how best to protect something, because it's not always the case that a patent is stronger.
Okay.
Because let me give you an example. If you file for a patent application on something, 18 months after me and you file that gets published to the world.
Yeah.
So now you've just disclosed whatever it is to the world. Now, we haven't been granted a patent yet, right? We're still waiting. Sometimes it takes 3-4 years to get any rights granted. And a lot of times what's happening in that 3 or 4 window period is the U.S. Patent Trademark Office is sending you office action letters back, trying to narrow, either saying you can't patent that because it's already been in the public domain. It's prior art. They'll cite prior art. Somewhere in Germany, somebody published in a magazine something that was somewhat covering the scope of the claims that you're saying that you invented. They'll send you an office action and say, well, actually, that was publicly disclosed before, so you can't patent that. So then you have to get into this bickering and arguing match back and forth. And sometimes you don't get granted the patent. So now you've just disclosed your trade secret to the world because you taught everybody your solution. That's one of the things you need to do in your patent application is enable somebody who's reasonably skilled in the art to make, build, or use that technology. So you have to say, hey, I'm an inventor, and I have to enable you, if you're a software engineer, with enough knowledge to actually make, use, or employ what I'm claiming are in my patent. So you have to make a choice. Do we want to publicly disclose that? Is that something that we can afford to publicly disclose, and after 20 years from now be cool with that? Because if Coca-Cola would have patented their formula, they wouldn't be in business right now selling their sugar syrup or whatever is in the, we don't really even know what's in their syrup, right? It's still a secret. So in that respect, and I'm sure you've heard of Listerine, right? Listerine is a mouthwash. Well, Listerine is a formula that was made in the 1800s. I remember reading the case law around it, and they were licensing that indefinitely because if you have a patent, you can't keep licensing it after the 20 years is up. So you have to license but the trade secret, now if I have a trade secret and I'm willing to disclose that to you, I can license to you indefinitely, 100 years, 200 years. I could license the same trade secret over and over and generate revenue. So it's not necessarily, and the difficulty lies in knowing what the subject matter of each area of intellectual property is and how it pertains to what you're doing. Like right away, I know you're making photographs, right? But what else are you doing? I mean, sometimes your business model is to give away your IP and to monetize something else. You think about like Chance the Rapper. He doesn't sell his music. He sells merchandise and he sells concert tickets, but he gives away his music for free. And same thing for like Facebook. It's a service they render you. You charge you nothing and they sell your data. Yeah. Right. And so they're monetizing something different than actually what you think of traditionally as being sold as IP. The service they render you on Facebook, the platform and all that, right? They're not selling that. They're selling your data. So the fact that you're listing who you know, what you like, and whatever your information you're allowing them to, now they're selling that aspect of their business. So they've come up with a different way to put where do you attach the monetary rights to your revenue stream is something you have to consider. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, even like, I do proposal writing as like contracting work, and that's something that like, I'm creating something, but then immediately giving away that IP to the company that I'm doing the contracting for. Right. So if you had to kind of sum everything up, what are kind of the most helpful and effective resources or tactics that small businesses can use to protect their IP? For the entrepreneur who's dreaming of something great, and it's great, in your head, it's good, it's true, it feels good. First of all, write that idea down, because I'm sure we've all had a million good ideas that if we just followed one of them, we'd be on the right path.
So when you're going down the road, and it's like, somebody needs to invent that.
Yeah, and then you figure out actually later while you're, having coffee, reading the paper, somebody did, and you're like, man, I knew that like 6 months ago. Yeah.
You could have been sitting on a mother load of money then.
Yeah, so write down your ideas. And everything starts as a secret. Everything starts as a secret in your head. Until you tell somebody, it's a secret. So once you have that concept in your mind, you need to be cognizant of the fact that whoever you disclose that information to, unless they're under a duty of confidentiality to disclose that, to not further disclose or use that information, you're pretty much teaching everybody your best idea. So write your ideas down. That way you have copyright protection. Once your hand comes off the paper, lock that under a safe drawer, right? Tell only the people around you that you can trust or that you can get to sign non-disclosure agreements, your pals, your family, like, hey, I want to tell you this. Or, if you're and your brother or your sister or something, you're like, we're going to start a business, that's great, but realize that you're individuals and the business is its own person in a way, so you need to be good ushers and stewards of the business. And so protecting the IP is a business asset. You want to convey rights to the business so that the business owns the intellectual property, and then manage those assets like you would any other asset. Make sure you know where it is and make sure you know what it is, and then you safeguard it like the information we were just talking about, and then deploy it when you need to use it, And so that's what I would recommend, is that people who are at that phase, when you're just dreaming up something, write it down, your idea. It's protected by copyright. Don't disclose it. Mark it as information that's confidential. That way it could be protected as a trade secret. And then as you start thinking through your business plan, how are we going to attach a revenue to this? Are we going to sell a bottle of water? Or are we going to sell advertising space on our bottle of water and give the water away free? You know what I'm saying? So think about how to commoditize whatever it is you're selling. That concept, that marketing plan is a trade secret. Until you tell somebody, like I could just tell you right now something about my marketing plan. We're talking about marketing. I mean, millions and trillions of dollars are spent every day on marketing, and they're very smart people coming up with ways to market to you, and attaching revenue to different parts of that is very unique and innovative. And that is something that if you're first to move on that, you can generate a tremendous amount of money. So YouTube's a good example of that.
Yeah.
A lot of people making a lot of money off of Instagram, YouTube, coming up with, selling not necessarily their pictures to Instagram, but building a accounting of people and then generating ad traffic to that account. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So figure out your revenue stream.
Consumers are the product advertisers. That's how they make their money. Like, we buy the product to pay for the company. Well, the company is basically buying our marketing, or they're paying for marketing so they can buy us.
That's
We're
right.
the product for them.
I think that's the most interesting concept in just the entire economy today, is the idea of, more often than not, we don't spend money on products, we spend attention. And attention is a commodity. That's some next level stuff.
It really is. I mean, and you think about all the things that are surrounding us every day that are just billboard space that is ineffectual, that isn't really being used. Like, even when I'm driving on the highway and I see those huge billboards and I'm like, are they really getting the purchase out of that billboard? Because it's like, I've been by that a million times and I couldn't tell you what's on that billboard. But then again, there's little things like a bottle of water I carry with me all day. And there's advertising space on here. Like, is anybody thinking about monetizing that? Eventually they will. Like the watches nowadays, the watches that we have, sometimes they're, there's little, watch. So at some point they'll be selling commercials on that little, you'll be looking down at your watch looking for the time, and they'll be advertising something to you.
You have to watch 5 seconds to get to the next watch app you're trying to get to.
Right. You think about, what's it called? All these streaming music, SoundCloud, all these people. Well, they're, you turn them on, they're free, and then suddenly 3 or 4 minutes in, there's a commercial being, run through your brain, and you're like, wow, man, this is wild. I was listening to music, suddenly now I'm talking about buying dog food.
That's how the radio goes. 82% of people remember what's on the radio. I remember this one commercial where it's like a dude in his basement, and then you can hear his mom yelling. He's like, and now 82% of people know I live with my mom, and that stuck with me forever. I just thought it was a funny, good radio commercial.
Yeah, so the media is changed in terms of how can you get people's attention? It used to be like you need to buy a plane and fly it over downtown Chicago with the thing following on the back, like, hey, we're throwing a party tonight at this nightclub, and it was like, wow. Now it's just like, where people are based on, all these social media apps. They're posting
Find
online.
my friends, where you share your
Suddenly
location.
It's like, we know who's going to be going out tonight, and we can market directly to them, and so you have to think about, in your business, know who your customer is. Get next to your customer, become your customer, because as soon as you can think like they are, you could start thinking about what they care about, and then you can align your product or service to whatever their interests are. So that's the other aspect, is part of your business plan should be, how are we getting next to our customer? How are we staying in front of them? And how are we getting that? Where do they hang out? Where do they go? What do they do?
You look at the demographics, you look at the geographical locations.
Are they people who like, podcasts and radio shows? Are they people who like to go out and hike in the woods? Are they the same, but at different times of the day? And so where do you market to them, and when do you market to them? And so all these things you play into your business model. And then again, thinking through who you're going to partner with. One thing I always tell entrepreneurs is, don't try and do it alone. Find a business partner. Find somebody who has the things that you don't. If you're a good speaker, but you're not really good behind closed doors, you like being out in public, find somebody who's good with the books, somebody who's really good at knowing the numbers or knowing something behind software engineering. If somebody's a coder and you're not, but you know what the thing should look like, go find yourself a real good coder or something. You want somebody who complements your strengths. And so, align yourself with that, because no business is built by anyone by themselves. So any great business is going to have a bunch of great, you think about the major Apples and Googles, and those companies all started with like a founders club, let's say, and then those people collaborated together, and then it grew. It slowly starts to grow, and then as you grow, your business grows, you add more people, and always pay attention to the fact that you want to surround yourself with people with the things you don't know, because you can't know it all. Intellectual property is one of those good examples where it's like, you don't need to know everything. You just need to know somebody who knows a lot about that particular aspect of the business. Like, I know nothing about marketing and advertising, but if I know Gracie does, then all I need to know is that when I get to the point where I need to know my marketing strategy, I have a consultation and I pay her for the IP she's going to create and then walk away. You know what I mean? And so you have to know what you don't know and know where to get it, and then go find that person or that group, learn it as much as you can. And if you're going to be a CEO, you're not going to be perfect at everything. You need to know something about everything, and then you just hire people who are much better than you at whatever it is you aren't skilled and talented at.
Yeah. Well, this has been super fascinating discussion.
I've enjoyed this very much.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot. You've taught me a lot.
I know,
Yeah.
and there's going to be a small fee. I'm going to I'll put my little hat on the counter here. Y'all can fill it with some coins. No, I'm just kidding. But no, in all seriousness, entrepreneurship is hard.
Yeah.
You know, there's days and nights and weeks and years where go by. You lose stress because, you know, you're trying so hard to get your product out. You believe so strongly in it. And if you just get one customer that falls in love with whatever your product or services is, live on that feeling, because
you get the word of mouth
yes,
too.
live on that feeling that they give you, like when they send you a note or they call you and say that was awesome, or I had a great time, or whatever it was that you do. Feed off of that energy. Try and, like Gracie's saying, take that, and in terms of a word of mouth thing, just get one more, and always search for your anchor customer. There's somebody or some organization or group that you're like eyeballing, like if we could just get them to buy it, that would put us in the game. You know what I mean? That would put us on the map. And chase that anchor customer. Go wherever they go. If they go, you know, for tea time at 2:30, and the CEOs of those companies are wherever they are, or the purchasing department, maybe it's not the CEO who makes the decision, maybe it's the purchasing department. Where do they go for coffee? Go by there, and you don't have to sell them really anything. You just introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm a business owner, and, you know, start talking to people authentically, and you never know.
Networking is huge.
You'll never know what'll come out of their mouth. First time I went to sell a beverage product, to one of the convenience store guys that I knew growing up. So I knew for sure I was going to sell this guy something, because I know him for many years. Got in there, showed him the product. He really liked it. After 10 minutes of conversation, he was trying to invest in my business. And so I was there to make a product sale, and all of a sudden now I have an investor. So don't lose sight of the fact that sometimes your consumers become your investors, because they fall in love with your product and they're like, absolutely, and I want to be in on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So never lose sight of the forest for the trees. You're always selling something. You don't know exactly what your customer is interested in, but keep your ears and your eyes open.
All right, man. Well, it's been a great conversation. I think that people are going to love this episode, and
I appreciate you coming in.
No problem.
thanks so
Anytime,
much,
guys.
Thanks so much to Jarrett for being on the podcast. I think both Gracie and I are a bit wiser just for having been there for it. That's the great thing about the Mentor Spotlight podcast. It's pretty much impossible to listen through one without learning a lot. While you all stay on the lookout for the next podcast, check out our socials at UAH I2C on Instagram and Twitter, and UAH Invention to Innovation Center on Facebook. Onward and upward.